Welcome to the 700 Club. I'm Wendy Griffith. An about-face for Israel. The government will let Democratic Congresswoman Rashid Tlaib enter the West Bank after she promised she would not promote any boycotts against Israel while she's there. The move comes a day after Israel said Tlaib and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar could not come into the country because they support boycotts against it. Chris Mitchell brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Today, Israel granted Michigan Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib's request to visit the country on humanitarian grounds to see her grandmother. That announcement came after Thursday's decision by Prime Minister Netanyahu, who said Israel had the legal and moral right to bar Tlaib and her fellow Democratic freshman Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. In a statement, he said, "As a free and vibrant democracy, Israel is open to critics and criticism, with one exception. Israeli law prohibits the entry into Israel of those who call for and work to impose boycotts on Israel, as do other democracies that prohibit the entry of people who seek to harm the country." U.S. President Trump had tweeted prior to Netanyahu's announcement.
I think it would show a terrible sign. They want to do boycotts. They said horrible things about Jewish people. They said horrible things about Israel and Israelis. I think it would be a terrible thing, frankly, for Israel to let these two people who speak so badly about Israel come in.
It was President Trump's tweet before the decision that many believe persuaded Netanyahu to bar the Congresswoman. Trump said that Israel would show great weakness if they allowed them in, even though a few weeks ago, Israel's ambassador to the U.S. said that Israel would allow Omar and Tlaib to come in out of respect for the U.S. Congress. Both Omar and Tlaib hit back at Netanyahu. Omar accused Netanyahu of imposing a ban on Muslim women and added the decision was an insult to democratic values. One reason Netanyahu said they barred Omar and Tlaib's trip was because it was sponsored by MIFTA, an organization that supports the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement and has called suicide bombers part of the resistance movement. U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman released a statement that noted 70 freshman members of Congress of both parties just completed a balanced visit to Israel, but said the Tlaib-Omar delegation had limited its exposure to tours organized by the most strident of BDS activists. Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu accused Friedman on Twitter of dual loyalty, an accusation considered by many to be anti-Semitic. He later apologized and deleted his tweet. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. In other news, President Trump says the U.S. has the hottest economy in the world. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John.
Thanks, Wendy. The president tried to calm growing recession fears Thursday night at a New Hampshire Keep America Great rally where he went on the attack against Democrats. Gary Lane brings us the story.
The economy took center stage as an optimistic President Trump assured New Hampshire supporters that their state and the U.S. economy remain strong.
You have the best unemployment. You have the most successful state in the history of your state and in the history of our country. And then you're going to vote for somebody else? Oh, great. Let's vote for Elizabeth Pocahontas Warren.
A Fox News poll shows that Senator Warren is now the second choice of Democrats, behind former Vice President Joe Biden, to be their party's nominee to run against Trump. The president said it doesn't matter who the Democrats choose. Then he took a swipe at Biden.
I think Sleepy Joe may be able to limp across the finish line. But today they announced that they're going to cut way back on his appearances because he is such a disaster.
The Hill reported Biden's allies have floated the idea of changing his schedule because he made so many gaffes in recent days. Trump told the crowd of 12,000 that we now have a bunch of socialists or communists to beat. And at this point, it may be an uphill fight for Trump. The same Fox News poll shows left-wing Democrats Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Kamala Harris defeating the president. Joe Biden would beat Trump by the widest margin, 50% to 38%. Regardless of early polls, the president says voters have to vote for him to protect the strong economy, even if voters don't personally like him.
But you have no choice but to vote for me because your 401ks, down the tubes, everything's going to be down the tubes. So whether you love me or hate me, you got to vote for me.
The president discussed a wide range of issues, including China trade and gun control. In his first rally since the Dayton and El Paso shootings, the president said mentally deranged and dangerous people need to be institutionalized and taken off the streets. He said he's working hard to make sure guns are kept out of the hands of the mentally ill.
But people have to remember, however, that there is a mental illness problem that has to be dealt with. It's not the gun that pulls the trigger. It's the person holding the gun.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thanks, Gary. Turning overseas, a deadly nuclear explosion in Russia last week was another sign the country is working to build up its nuclear weapons program. But as national security correspondent Eric Phillips reports, while Russia poses the greatest threat, it's far from the only one.
Not only does this give America insight into what the Russians are doing, but it's also a reminder for the U.S. to not let up on its own nuclear development. Because while Russia poses the greatest threat, it is certainly far from the only one. This was the scene as 5 Russian scientists were laid to rest after last week's blast. They, along with 2 others believed to have been killed during testing of the Burevestnik cruise missile. Dubbed Skyfall by NATO, it would be a tool in the Russians' nuclear arsenal unmatched by any other nation. Putin himself calling it a vengeance weapon that would fly lower, faster, and farther than any other.
The danger that I see is that having for essentially 25, even maybe 30 years, neglected our nuclear deterrent. We are now potentially not only considerably inferior to the Russians, but maybe even emboldening them.
President Trump tweeted, "The United States is learning much from the failed missile explosion in Russia. We have similar, though more advanced, technology." But is U.S. technology in this area really better than the Russians? Gaffney doesn't think so.
I fear that the president may have been sold a bill of goods here, that some of the work that we have in prospect to modernize our arsenal will be comparable, I'm sure, to that of the Russians, but it isn't in place now, and an awful lot of what they have is.
The U.S. has now pulled out of the decades-old INF treaty, and the Pentagon and NATO are trying to quickly develop systems that could fend off a Russian attack. And while Russia may be the biggest threat, former diplomat and Defense Department official Eric Edelman says it's clear they're not the only threat.
Both Russia and China are investing in new nuclear weapons and new delivery platforms.
There's also North Korea, the president so far unsuccessful in convincing dictator Kim Jong-un to shed nuclear weaponry. And Iran, which is busy enriching its uranium, priming it for development of nuclear weapons, a source of much contention between Tehran and the White House. Experts agree that the chances of nuclear war are slim, but with everyone seemingly ramping up, it's not out of the question. In your opinion, what is the likelihood that we could be heading for nuclear war?
I don't think that we certainly are going to start any nuclear wars. I don't think that as long as we are credibly deterring attack, that's very likely.
Experts are skeptical that Russia will ever be able to work out all the bugs where the so-called Skyfall or doomsday weapon is concerned. And if it does, at what cost? The Kremlin still not confirming that the explosion was the result of testing the cruise missile, only saying in a statement, quote, "Accidents happen." In Washington, Eric Phillips, CBN News.
Thank you, Eric. Well, Louisiana students will see the motto "In God We Trust" on public school walls this year. Democratic Governor John Bel Edwards signed a measure into law last year requiring the national motto be posted in every public school after both the State House and Senate passed it unanimously. It also requires students be taught about the U.S. flag and patriotic customs by the time they're in the 5th grade. Wendy, it sounds like they're going to be learning more lessons about Betsy Ross and the Stars and Stripes.
I like it, and I know those folks down in Louisiana like it too. Well, thanks, John.